Welcome to the Writing Black Joy podcast, where we celebrate the joyful narratives of the Black creatives writing their names on the pages of history and on our hearts. I am your host, Sophia Robinson. Here, you'll find conversations with amazing Black creatives, learn more about their projects and the joy that they're bringing into the world, find inspiration for your own creative ventures, and dive deep into the topics that shape our narratives. The guests on this podcast are all sorts of creatives, from writers of fiction and nonfiction to playwrights and actors, visual artists, podcasters, and so much more who are bringing joy to their narratives. So, if you are a writer, a creative, or a lover of the arts, or you simply want to hear some good conversations, keep on listening and welcome to the show. Welcome back to Writing Black Joy. Thank you so much for being here and for tuning in. If you haven't already done so, or if this is your first time listening, hit subscribe so that you won't miss an episode and share it with a friend, especially those friends of yours whose love language is receiving podcast recommendations. I would also love to hear from you. You may have noticed this season and the last that towards the end of every episode, I have a lightning round, and it's been such a hit that I am bringing the lightning round to you, my listeners. Go over to www.writingblackjoy.com and leave me a voice note answering one of the lightning round questions. What always makes you laugh? What is something you dread but that always feels good afterwards? Or what is bringing you joy right now? I cannot wait to hear from you. Now, let's talk about this week's guest, Cher Terais. Cher Terais is an acclaimed author known for her captivating love stories set in exotic destinations worldwide. She beautifully explores the complexities of Black love, blending rich cultural experiences with heartfelt romance. Her debut novel, Bali Blue, immerses readers in Bali's lush landscapes, while Mess on the Mara intertwines modern dating with Kenya's breathtaking savannahs. With upcoming novels set in Mexico, Paris, Turkey, and Fiji, Cher's passion for travel fuels her storytelling. A former Army service member and program manager in the Middle East, her global experiences bring authenticity to her work. Originally from Warner Robins, Georgia, she's traveled across Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and Europe, crafting immersive, culturally rich narratives. As a proud mother and grandmother, she embraces adventure both in life and in writing. A true voice in Wanderlust Romance, Cher's stories celebrate love, self-discovery, and the transformative power of travel. I really enjoyed chatting with Cher as somebody who also loves love and loves travel. And Cher and I discussed how the books she grew up reading inspired her writing of Wanderlust Romance, how a solo trip inspired her first book, what travel means to her, a song that she wrote for her latest book, how she becomes inspired by other indie authors, how her books became a brand that extended beyond the page, how she built her reader community, future projects that dig a bit into New Orleans magic and tie in her love for history and design, and so much more. Okay, let's head over to the conversation with Cher, and I hope that you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Hey, welcome back to Writing Black Joy, and I am so excited to have with me Cher today, and we are going to be talking about travel, about writing, about love. You don't know this about me, Cher, but these are three of my favorite things.
Oh, yes.
It's going to be so good. I cannot wait. So obviously we've heard a little bit about you from your bio, but now we're about to get the real deal. So tell me a little bit about your journey as a writer. How did you get to quote you, take readers on stunning exotic journeys where Black love flourishes in the most beautiful places around the globe? I love that. How did you get there?
So, first of all, I thank you for having me, Sophia. Writing Black Joy, right? So, I definitely want to make the connection to the theme of your show because I feel that my journeys in my book send perfectly imperfect women on journeys of joy, even when perhaps they don't originate, like the story doesn't begin all the time in joy, but by the end at least, you've gone on this journey, this life journey with these characters through these beautiful exotic locations, and at the end of the day, I write romance. So we all know they're going to end in a happily ever after. So joy is the game. Listen, how did I start this? Oh my God, it's such a journey. And I'm going to try to paint the picture for you because it is indeed joyful. And even with my own life, I feel like books were my sanctuary. Stories were my sanctuary. And like many young Black women, and I'm of an age where I grew up in a time where it was a little hard to be Black in America, especially in the Southeast where drug pandemic was rampant. And so I grew up during that time as a young kid, and I saw things that I didn't necessarily want to or need to see. And so books, again, became my sanctuary. So I'll name some of the books and series that put me on this trajectory to write these stories that I write. But I'll start with L. Frank Baum and his Oz series, you know.
Oh, you're like, I love it. I love Oz, and I love like all of them. I love like Oswald Oz and Return to Oz and all the. I think I reread some of them like in the last couple of years. I love it.
Listen, I need to do that. It's been a long time, but I think I read every last book, and a lot of people don't know that there's more than just the Wizard of Oz. There's like 80 books in this series, and it's a world that he created. That listen, I escaped in Oz.
I love that. I'll tell you what I did last Christmas. I rewatched. I think it was Ozma of Oz, and in years, and I'm like, it still holds up.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So from an escape perspective, I escaped into Oz, and then I found the Babysitters Club series, and as I was becoming a preteen, tween, or I wouldn't call it tween. And I learned, I feel like the series of books that I gravitated to, I was looking for something. And during that time of my life, I was seeking community and didn't even know it. And then reading like the series, The Babysitters Club, again, escapism, right? I learned what it looked like to have a group of friends and actually to belong and all that. And then jumped even further. I started reading Danielle Steele. And that's when I fell in love with romance. Danielle Steele, Rosemary Rogers from a historical romance perspective. And then I'm going to take you even on another jump, a leap to my late teens, early 20s, and I discovered Eric Jerome Dickey. And so there's the series and sequence of these books and phases that I went through personally in life that kind of led me to write romance even today. And so with Eric Jerome Dickey, that I still was in love with love, but I also was experiencing and exploring my own personal love stories and discovering Black love. And so here I am. And let me also say, I found Eric Jerome Dickey when I first went into the military. And so I was not only discovering love, Black love, I was also beginning to see the world for the first time. And so that lets you know where the whole trajectory entered and intersected at Wanderlust Romance for me, which is my celebration of perfectly imperfect Black women, brown women, and the love story that we find ourselves in, which are not always perfect, but we deserve a happily ever after too. Sometimes they just happen in some of the most stunning exotic locations around the world. So here we are.
I love that. I want to return to something you said early on when you talked about growing up at a time when it's hard to be Black in America. And I think that was at the heart of, for me, starting writing Black Joy, because I was like, I felt like there wasn't enough of those joyful stories being told. And so then for me, I grew up in Barbados, I grew up in the Caribbean. Even for me, reading books by Caribbean authors, books by I felt like they were so traumatic sometimes, and I'm like, I don't even know if I want to see myself in that story. Like, where are the stories that I want to just place myself? And I love you. I love Oz. I love Narnia.
Oh yeah,
I was a bit of a Star Trek. Like for me, it was the watching something that I felt like I wanted to belong in that place, and I really resonate with that. But then also you talk about the travel, and I love I've always loved traveling. I think reading, I always tell people like reading was what made me want to travel, and learning was what made me want to travel. I learned languages at school. I want to go to France. I want to go to all these places. And so I moved to the UK.
Yeah.
For college, and then me and my best friend would travel. So I love traveling. I feel like traveling opens you up to the idea that you can live a different life in a different place. Like people in different places living different lives, and there's so live life, and I feel like it just opens your mind and broadens it. So I love that you kind of bring that element into your stories as well.
Absolutely. And, like I said, I discovered Black love at the same time where I was discovering the world. So very similarly in the military, that's the first time I actually got to leave this country. First place that I went outside of the U.S. was Germany. And that's where I saw the first castle that I ever saw. Now, this mind, and, think about it. I talked about L. Frank Baum in the Oz series, and thought already had this broad imagination about oh my God, I want to go to a castle. And I must say, I've never had the thought or the idea that I wanted to, be a princess and find my Prince Charming. I never had that kind of dream. However, I wanted to see these castles. I wanted to see where he may have gotten the vision to write some of the imagery he wrote in his stories. And listen, Hansel and Gretel, L. Frank Baum, the Oz theory, I got to see that in real world the first time I went to Germany. Like, all I could think was, what looked like all the stories that I've ever read about. And so that for me led me to want to explore more of the world. 6 of the 7 continents I've been on now. And listen, I write these stories rooted in reality. Therefore, I cannot write a story about a place if I haven't visited. I literally tied it together. The writing, the traveling, all of it. So,
I love that. I love that. I also read Blyton. So I always tell people they moved to England because I grew up reading Enid Blyton. It is only half a joke. I will leave that there. But the other thing, I love that you talk about the influence that travel has on your writing, because I always thought that I would write fiction. Was my goal to write exotic fiction. Like I was like, I want to write fiction so complicated that you need a whole book to understand this book I've just written. I got off that idea, but that was my jam when I was younger. But when I started writing, I was travel writing. I was traveling all over the world. My best friend and I were interrailing, and I started writing these long emails to my friend, and that was actually how I started writing, and then started blogging. So I discovered my nonfiction writing through travel, and the only fiction I've ever successfully written is a romance novel.
Listen, it's the biggest genre, but also the most active genre. That is so interesting that we are all still on this journey of discovering romance, love. What does it mean to you, to me, to everybody? And it's so amazing that this genre has grown to what it is in so many different cultures and areas of the world. For Black women, for independent authors, I don't see the romance genre ever slowing down. Let me just say that. But it's amazing that you found success there. Especially in the fiction space. But yes,
I wouldn't use the word success, but I certainly enjoyed it. So, not a success for me. I will have to say that is where I get my success from. So, tell me a little bit about that first book that you wrote. I want to dive into that creative process. Had you been writing before you wrote that first book, or did you just be like, I think I want to write a book? Like, how did that happen?
So once again, books have always been my escape. The first thing that I wrote, however, look, I'm going to claim my success. I was in the 2nd grade, and the first thing that I wrote that got published was a poem. And it was not a romantic book, but it was
my age.
Not in 2nd grade. But that was the first time I wrote something, and I had a teacher who submitted it to this journal and it got published. I do not know whatever happened to that, by the way. But that was the first time that someone had told me, you should be a writer. And at that time, she told me, you should go into journalism. And for all these years later, leading up to my 10th grade, 11th grade year in high school, I had it in my head that I was going to be a journalist. And then I decided, well, I don't want to just be any kind of journalist. I want to be a photojournalist. And I want to go to some of the, as a matter of fact, we were in the middle of Desert Storm. We were in a war at the time. And I was amazed by some of the imagery that the journalists were taking in Kuwait and in the Middle East during this conflict that we were in. And I decided I wanted to do that. So the military now is in my purview. And so none of that came to me, by the way. First of all, by the time I was out of high school, I knew I was going in the Army. I needed to go into the Army, but it was not to be crawling around on the ground to take photos of, trauma. I didn't want that anymore. And I didn't want to be a journalist. However, I did still write. And so I started writing my first book around the age of 20, 21. Quickly learned I didn't know what I was doing, had no clue what I was doing. And so I put it down. But I still continued to read voraciously and toy with the idea of a story. It wasn't until 2018 that it all clicked. We were, or I was actually traveling heavy then, but more so for personal travel and exploration. And I wanted to take my first solo trip. I had already gone solo to Vegas, and I said, now I want to go further. And so I decided on a whim to go to Bali for 10 days. And it all just, like I said, clicked. I'm going on a solo journey. As far as I've ever been away from home by myself, I'm going to actually start writing a story. And right before I left for that trip, had no idea what the story was going to be about. About 3 weeks prior to me leaving, an earthquake happened in Bali, in the Lombok region of Bali. And I was like, I am literally about to fly into a place where there was an earthquake. And that was the spark for my very first book, Bali Blue.
Oh, I love. Tell me a little bit about what traveling means to you, because I realize I talked a bit about my sort of love for traveling, but I like to hear about what traveling means to you.
It is my way of taking, like I said, all of that fantasy, all of that escapism that I got as a youth through reading about all these different places. Travel for me became another form of escape, but into reality this time instead of into a book. I wanted to explore all these amazing places that I started reading about so long ago and actually formulate my life actually around that. I never wanted to be painted into a box of any sort. I always was interested in languages and patterns and call myself learning all the French, German, Spanish, Italian. I've tried all of them. I realized quick, I'm not a linguist. I just love
language, but I think I always tell people, I think because I write and I love expressing through language, I found it hard to learn languages because I don't like going through that initial phase where I'm bad at it and I'm picking words out. Like currently learning Portuguese, and I've got an office mate who was Portuguese. And he goes, "You're so good," and I'm like, all I can say is like the cat went over, like around the corner or whatever. I can't. I want to have a deep conversation, and you can't have a deep conversation if you only know 20 words. So I feel you on that.
I've heard that unless you can think in the language that you're trying to learn, that is very hard. And apparently, I cannot think in Spanish or French or German. I can think in English, but by the time I interpret it to the other language, the moment is past. So not for me. However, I'm a people watcher. And so I love traveling to different places, and I'm absolutely okay without being able to speak the language because I'm going to make up the story in my head anyway about what they're saying.
I love that you're a people watcher. I always, when I was in college, one of the things I learned was that like 70-something% of communication is not verbal. To me, I'm like, I can communicate with anybody. Like it's only the 20-something% that I may get wrong, but it might help to have a little bit of language But I love that people watching. I really like that. I'm curious, do you have a quote either from your work or from someone else that you admire that represents joy for you?
So, oh my, actually, I have a new book that's coming out, and I know. I know. I write about all these wonderful places. This actual book is a homecoming of sorts. And it starts out in Paris and brings us home to South Georgia. And there is a song that I wrote for this book. It's actually the title song for the book. And I'll cue it up a little bit and then I'm going to tell you the quote. But it's a second chance romance where I'm writing about older characters this time around. So a lot of times you pick up a romance book and it's about, 20, 30-year-olds. And, I wanted to take a moment not to just write about love and joy. I'm writing two parallel stories in this book. So you'll see the first time they fall in love as teenagers, 17, 18 years old. And then the book more 30 years later. And now they're 47 and 48-year-olds. So it's a very grown romance. It's very grown. Yeah, it's very sexy. And there's a song. It's set in the country, like I said, the southern hemisphere of the United States, rather. And so I wrote this quote down, and it goes, they say, iron sharpens iron, but your leather on steel. On this crossroads of love, you grip your reins, I grip my wheel. And that's kind of the first opening part of the song where these two young people are going their separate ways to explore life. And 30 years later, the second chant comes about and the song changes a little bit and it goes, they say iron sharpens iron, but so can leather for steel. We're still back at this crossroads of love, but this time I grip your reins, you grip my wheel. And so they're making a choice to come together. And the reason why it brings me joy is because I feel like that's life, right? We have all these choices, and sometimes we make the right ones, sometimes we make the wrong ones, but when you get it right, it's so powerful. And so this book is a testament to having that second chance to make a choice and ultimately feeling like you made the right choice finally. So
I love that. It reminds me of a story of a very real person I know who ended up having a second chance with the most unlikeliest of people. And I always remember her mother said to her, there's no such thing as a right choice. Just make a choice. And I love that because I think you can see someone who is all wrong for you on paper. But in real life, you choose to overcome those differences and be together. Alternatively, someone could beat all the boxes on paper, but that doesn't mean that there's not going to be that friction when things do not, which is like all the time, because that's life, right? Life is ups, downs. So I really that's such a real story to me. I love that so much. Now that you started writing that song, so let us go on a slight tangent. Have you written other songs for other books before?
I have not. Listen, this is a culmination of so many things happening at one time. First things first, this book that I'm writing, this project, is probably the closest thing to my own real life that I've ever written about. It is still fiction. However, I don't want to call him the love of my life. I don't need to give him that kind of big head, but definitely a teenage love. And I had to go to this guy, and ask for permission to write the story because even though it's fiction, there are personal anecdotes, if you will, that are sprinkled throughout. And I didn't want him picking up this book and like, hey, this sounds familiar to me. But it was a very impactful time of my life, but also a very impactful relationship that we cultivated. And we remained friends. However, we chose to go separate ways, right? Now, don't get me wrong. We never came back for that second time around. However, I have the thought, what if we had that second time around. And so that story, and by the way, 30 years later is right now from that story. This is a 30-year time gap. And then we have Beyonce's Cowboy Carter coming out, and she's going to be here in concert in July. So a lot of everything is set around certain events that are happening right now, and it's just an amazing time. So this song, now that country music has become popular again in our community, I was like, wow, this is like perfect. This is just serendipitous. I didn't intend for this to be like the time frame or how it all came to be, but it's just an amazing culmination. So I had to write a song. I feel like I had.
And I absolutely love that. And I mean, you said you started your writing life writing poetry. Funnily enough, so did I. I was me and a friend of mine went to this poetry workshop a few weeks ago. I said to her, because she's just finished her first book.
Yes.
She's in that sort of like last few edits kind of phase. And I've done like nonfiction books on that romance novel that I mentioned. But we're going to a poetry workshop, and she's a lovely poet. She writes a lot of poetry. And I was like, listen, you know me, I don't write poetry. Like if I write poetry, it's the one thing I always tell people that it almost comes to me like it comes coming from a bolt out of the blue, like, oh, it's time to write a poem now. And then it just all over the page. And then it's like, that's it. The muse will leave me, and it'll be another couple of years before I write a poem. But I love talking to poets because I feel like I just think, how's your brain work? I love that. So tell me about your creative process, both for the book, but for like other things, poetry, for this song. Like, is it different?
And very similar to what you just said. It's like a lightning bolt of, energy around a topic, a character. Mostly for me, it's around a place. Because I think in my writing, especially that I write Wanderlust and these places set in these wonderfully exotic places, or in stories set in these wonderfully exotic places, it usually is a story starts forming for me when I'm somewhere and I'm totally immersed in a culture, or I can literally be sitting by the beach. I'll just use that as an example. And the sound of a wave sounds funny to me or resonates with me. And I always go into this, well, what is this? What is that? And I might hear a sound, or I might see a color or a flower, and the what if energy starts. So usually a location that I'm in that inspires the what if, that inspires the story. And then I have to continue the what, the 5 whys, if you will. And usually by the time I get to that 5th, well, why is this sound amazing? Or why is this color grabbing your attention? Or what is it about the way she just laughed in this cafe that's inspiring? All those 5 whys usually lead to a character. And then by the time the character is formed, now I'm just, filling in the pieces and the gaps, and the story starts taking place from there. So, yeah.
I love that.
And same thing with the poem and the song that was written. It's all the same process to me.
Ooh, that's amazing. And something you said earlier was that you tried to write a book like in your early 20s and you didn't know how. So what joined up the dots for you? Did you like take any classes, or did you just kind of practice? What do you find the difference between that first one and now?
A little bit of all of the above that you just said. I never really stopped writing. I just didn't do anything with it. And then I discovered indie authors. Let me be very clear. I was so, like many readers, I would read the books that I heard about the most. And, if you think about that, what books do you hear about the most? Usually traditionally published authors, right? And then I got heavy on Instagram, and I started discovering indie authors. And I was like, must be something to this. A lot of people are talking about it. I don't hear it in this space over here, but I hear it every time I open up Instagram. They're talking about Christina C. Jones or Love Belvin, some of now my favorite indie authors. And I started following their work, and I was like, these are amazing. And I was like, they're breaking rules of romance. And so I listened to a few podcast episodes. I listened to a few of Christina C. Jones's interviews, and really discovered what she did for her process. And I was like, I could try this again. And I did. And then I found a group of indie authors that I became a part of, and we became accountable to each other. And so books started coming from out of nowhere. Story Genius, I'll give them a shout out. That helped me kind of realize how to pull that string through a story and connect the inner story of my characters, to the arc of the story, the arc of the characters. And so again, it was all kinds of things that led to the expression of what my books are. And I would never just take the credit, because listen, it was a lot of people who don't even realize that they helped me write that first story. Yeah.
I love that. And I love the point that you made about being able to pull together the inner story of your characters to the arc. Yeah. Because I think at their heart, at least the stories of our culture are stories of transformation in some way, whether it is, like small inner transformations or a big one or whatever, like it's that turning point, right? And so it does still require a bit of skill to kind of pull everything together. But I love that you had all that inspiration. I always tell people think writing is a lonely game, but I'm like, you can't write alone.
You cannot, especially if you plan to get better.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So you talked about indie publishing. So I want to dive into that a little bit, because I, like you, when I discovered indie publishing, it was in the nonfiction world. And I took this course years ago because I had some health issues, and I took the course. It was purely related to like health and dealing with that. They had a little conference, and I went there, and there were all these people that were there, these self-published authors. And I'm like, what is this? Because like I tell, I grew up in Barbados. I came to UK to study, and then I moved back to Barbados, and I just did not like the traditional publishing avenue was open then. And like I said, I have friends in Barbados now who have been traditionally published. Akira Bourne was on my podcast last season or the season before, I can't remember. And she's been traditionally published, and that's been happening for a few of the, authors in the Caribbean, etc. But for me, I don't think I ever even occurred to me that it would be a real thing. It was just like, I'm gonna print my book out on the printer at work and staple it together. And so my friends, like, that was the dream, right? And I went to this conference and people had self-published their books, and I was like, I'm sorry, what is this? Like, what? This is amazing to me. And I love it as it, it kind of removes the gatekeepers. You talk about people who are breaking the rules. I think that is how genres evolve. That's how writing styles evolve. But I think there's always this pressure to stick to form when you think about being traditionally published, because they're looking for those story beats, right? They're looking for you to be a part of that form. And so when I discovered self-publishing, I was like, and like a couple of years later, I'd self-published my first book. I was like, that was my jam. I started my blog, and then blogging, I met other people, and that was super fun. So what made you excited? You talked about meeting authors, indie authors who were breaking the rules, who were doing different things. That obviously made you excited. What are your current thoughts on indie publishing? Do you still think it's a good, I guess, method to put your work out there? What are your thoughts?
So that's a very layered.
Loaded. I know. I got to this question, because it is a little bit of a loaded question. So
let me start by saying I'm still extremely excited about being able to publish my own story in an independent way, because I get to control the story. If I were traditionally published author, you would never hear me talking about being a writer of Wanderlust Romance, which is a genre-bending genre, if you will. Dare I say made up? But I could not find a genre of romance, or subgenre for that matter, that allowed me to merge Black romance, multicultural romance, and also exotic locales, where the location is actually a key part of the story. Almost, dare I say, another character in the story, right? And so through indie publishing, I was able to kind of bend the genre and format my own or create my own. Maybe it's not the only, maybe my books are not the only books that fit into the genre, but I mean, it's the best way to describe my book. And I couldn't have done that before. Now, that I think is also very layered to being able to bend genres in the indie space, but also push boundaries and stories. I think I heard Kennedy Ryan, who was indie and now traditionally published, I heard her recently say that she tells romance or she writes romance, but she also sprinkles a bit of political commentary and a little bit about things that may be trigger warnings for some, domestic violence in her hoop theories, and but it all ends in the happily ever after. So she's kind of created a space where she can tell her story without sticking to the typical tropes, if you will. So again, indie publishing, I think, is attributed to or should get credit for that. And now the kind of pitfalls to it, but I'm gonna turn it into a joyous moment. It's very hard to make it in indie published. Indie published authors may become super famous or may never become known at all, and that's okay because I think there's a joy in being able to tell the story, and there's always going to be a reader for every story, right?
But yeah, I love that.
The good thing about being an indie author too is it has created such a springboard for not only my books, but to go off into other areas. At this point, I have a private travel club. I have followers who follow my stories because they want to walk the journey of the characters. So I provided for my readers, my fellow travelers, a pathway to travel the world with curated trips that are centered around my book. And so it has just become this amazing springboard. Now, I will say it's hard to get rich off being an indie published author, but if you play your cards right and look at your author brand as a brand instead of just books, it's so many different directions that you can go into.
I don't even know what to respond to for it. That is so amazing. I want to speak to what you said about the made up genre. All genres are made up. And I have a big, when people talk about things, if they dropped out of the sky, fully formed as a rule of nature, I'm like, all these things are made up. We decided that this was going to be a genre and that was going to be a genre. And there's nothing wrong with a creative deciding that these things together are going to be a genre. So I'm all about that. I love that. And that, for me, that is how new is this idea that I love. And I've now talked to it on this podcast so many times that people must become crazy. But there's this ecological term called the edge, where if you get to two different ecological systems meeting, we had the desert and a forest or whatever. And when they meet, new species that brings up along the edge, right? And so that's how new things are formed. So I think there's nothing wrong with bringing things together and forming something new. I'm a whole fan of that. So that's one thing I will say.
I am here for that. Let me just say the imagery that I just got in my head by you describing that meeting and merging.
Yeah, that's been something that I've talked about on the podcast a few times now, because I feel like there's so much scope there, and when people feel boxed in, and I'm a sort of person like you. I don't like to be in a box at all, and so to me, I'm like, putting things together. That is the jam right there. But the other thing you said when you talked about, it's hard to be rich as an indie author and sort of building your indie author brand. I think the most important thing for people to do is to decide like what is your goal. Because when I wrote, like I'll tell you, my romance novel that I wrote is called Lessons in Love. And like yours, it was loosely based on events that may or may not have been in my life. I will say no more about that. I'll have no further poems. That's, and I'm pretty sure he's in this fight. That's completely fine. But I haven't actually published it. I wrote it, and it was the most fun I had ever had in my life. Because you talked about having the sort of setting as almost like another character in the book. For me, I wanted to set my book in Barbados because I was like, I don't see any like beach and love stories out there. And that's what I wanted. So I wrote the thing, super fun. And that was all I wanted. And then all I wanted to do was share it. So in February, just after I'd written it, I was like, send me your email addresses and I will send you one chapter at a time, because I loved serialized books. When I was at college, I think it was Stephen King had this book that he just serialized it, and every week you'd rush into the bookstore to get it, and I love that. So I was like, I'm gonna do this. You get an email every day with the next chapter. And it was super fun. And that was it. I was happy. I didn't have a desire to get rich off the. So I feel like I was successful in that goal, even though, that was, maybe by someone else's standards, it wasn't. I feel very successful. But also, I think to myself, there are things that I do that have made me successful for the rest of my life. All of the blogging, writing, podcasting that I've done, when I took the job that I have now, I feel like it gave me so many of the skills that I needed to do this job. And I don't think there has to be a direct line between, like, as you talk about your travel club, the same thing. Like, it doesn't get based on the things that you write, but like you've created its own thing around it. And so I think, and I personally believe in creativity for its own sake. I really believe in that. Yes, you can make money, all the things, but also like there is a power and a joy in just creating stuff that will feed into other areas of your life in ways that you would never have imagined.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you said that. So glad you said that, because I get approached by new up and coming authors quite a bit. And a lot of times I think there's this misnomer that you write a book and you publish it and it's on Amazon. I think there's this misinformation that makes you rich, that makes you successful. And my whole notion is, first of all, you got to decide, I think, as you just said, what your goal is for writing, what you're writing and what you're putting out to the world, right? How it's received by the world. And that's no longer your control, But if your aim is to get rich, I think you have to understand a brand of things, and you have to look at it bigger than just the book. Because again, if it's just the book, I almost feel like the book is your calling card, very similar to you. Now you have a podcast, and you have these other things that are coming in, not just your book, but all your experiences in life. And I think that's what a brand is, being able to take all of your experiences, work, your expertise, your knowledge, your calling card, pull them all together to make your mark. And maybe that's the success of it all, leaving your mark. Yeah.
I love that. And I love the travel club because I personally love to travel. And like I said, for years, I did a lot of traveling with my best friend. And so she and I would just make the trips up however we wanted. And but I know that, I like the idea of being a trip that's based on a book. Because, I think about like going to New Zealand. I went before Lord of the Rings was a film, but like I know people go there to do the Lord of the Rings tour or whatever, and it's like the idea of, like you said, you're living in this thing that you enjoy. So I love that, tying the travel to the book, and that's amazing. Maybe one day I'll come on one of your adventures.
Come on.
I'm curious, what might have been some obstacles that you faced, and how did you overcome them? Did you overcome them? Did you just like them? Like, how did that work? as you go through both the writing
Mhm.
process?
So very similar to, I think, traditionally published authors, indie authors such as myself. It's always going to be a constant struggle trying to find new readers, or build your community of fellow readers and followers of your work. It remains a struggle for me. Social media has helped, of course,
Right.
but then you got to fight with algorithm. Word. And so sometimes I almost feel like I'm more of a social media marketer than I am an actual author because, again, I do write and I do want these books out into the world. That is one of my goals, right? And so there's this constant push to find the right community for my books. And I'm getting more so into just putting my books out there and let the chips fall where they may. At the same time, I know I find joy in these stories. I really do want to build a community of people who also find the same joy as I do with traveling, with Black love, with multicultural romance. I want to be in a group of people who are just as excited about those things as I am. So it's a balance.
Yeah, I get that. And tell me, what is your proudest or one of your proudest moments in this process?
I keep having them.
Well, what's your latest one then? If you keep having them, tell me what your latest one was.
The latest thing that I'm proud of is finishing this book that this project that I'm about to put out in early July. Finishing the book number 1 in less than 6 months.
Woo!
I'm proud about that because my first book took 3 years. My second book took a full year. My third book took about just under a year. And now I'm at the 6-month mark, which means a couple of things that I'm getting into a groove. But at the same time, I don't want to get into a groove and become formulated.
No.
So again, I'm working through it. And I love the fact that I can say, business-wise, I can project out how long. But at the same time, I refuse to give hard deadlines for myself because I want the creative space to be able to morph and change. And I think, again, that just goes back to being an indie author and having a little bit of leeway to be able to do that.
Yeah, exactly. You should get your own deadlines.
Yeah.
And tell me, what is something that, because you talked about how your process has changed throughout the year, book. So what is something that you either might do differently next time or something new to try next time? Like maybe it's like, I want to try something different. So what's next?
Great question. And I'm so glad you asked because I'm almost afraid to talk about this, but I want to try a little bit more of the maybe more spiritual romance. Maybe spiritual is not the word. It's kind of going to be a morphing of historical fiction, a little bit of paranormal, if you will, a little whimsy and art. Let me just give you an idea. I've been all over the world, but one of my favorite places in this world is and continues to be New Orleans, Louisiana.
That's on my list. That's on my list of places I want to go.
Listen, I have such a deep connection to this place that I want to talk about the lore. I want to talk about the history. I am a trained interior designer and architectural historian. This place is magical for me. And every time I go there, there's this story that's been tingling at the back of my brain back here. And it is pulling all those things, historical fiction. I want to pull in Vodun religion, voodoo, as some of us call it today, mix that with a profound connection with the artwork of Benin and Togo in Africa, where a big part of my culture comes from. I'm exploring my ancestry. And so there's just this pull to tell the story. I don't know how I'm going to pull it off.
I am ready. So I'm gonna follow you. I'm not even a big social media person. I'm like, I'm gonna follow her because I need to read this book. So maybe I'm gonna try it for my trip to New Orleans. I'm gonna time it just right, and I'm gonna go to New Orleans and I'm gonna read it and walk around and soak it all. So
I promise you, if you plan that trip, I will meet you there.
Okay, we have a deal, Cher. We have
All
a deal.
right.
So, one of the things I've been doing with my guests in the last couple of seasons is I've got this lightning round just for a bit of fun. So, I put 5 minutes on the clock and we
All
go.
right.
So, let's get started. What is bringing you joy right now?
Self-discovery.
Ooh,
Mm-hmm.
we may need a whole nother episode on that. So, that is awesome. What is something that you want to try for fun?
With so many things. Oh, you know what? You might have to edit this out. Dating two people at the same time.
I'm happy to edit that out if you want, but you get to decide. So
No, leave it. I mean, that's a truthism. Like I said, self-discovery is real right now. And yeah, unapologetically dating two people at the same time.
okay, so if you're open about it, then
Yeah.
that's the way to do it. Do you have any daily practices that cultivate joy for you?
It used to be meditation, but now it's just being mindful. Just being self-aware. I think that's really where I'll put that.
Nice, I love that. What is something that always makes you laugh?
Having, I'm a gossiper, so having those silent looks at someone who really gets you, and it's just hilarious, and you cannot explain why.
I love that. I love that. The secret look. That's great. So, what returns you to joy if you have a period that, maybe difficult, hard, more solemn?
It's New Orleans. That's the kind of joy and connection I have to that place. When I'm down, I instantly start planning a trip. As a matter of fact, I'm planning a trip for July.
So that trip to New Orleans. Okay, maybe I need to cut you out with some joy as well. I love that. What is something you dread, but that feels good afterwards?
Writing.
Really? Do you get it?
The art of procrastination is real over here. And I know it has to get done, even find joy in the thought process of it, but the physical sitting in front of a keyboard and a blank screen is dreadful to me until I see the screen filling.
Okay, that is very interesting. And last but not least, what is something you're dreaming about?
Italy.
Oh,
I'm
Seymour.
dreaming of Italy. I turned 50 in 2 years, and I'm already dreaming of how I want to celebrate my 50th birthday.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I also turned 50 in 2 years. Maybe I'll meet you in Italy. We'll talk. Off.
No, come.
Off screen. That sounds amazing. That's really good. So tell me a bit about this self-discovery piece. How has that been impacting you recently?
So, you know what? I've always been a creature of norms. I like normalizing everything from the way I write to the time I wake up in the morning, how I formulate my day. And by the way, I still work a full-time job as well. And so I'm very prescriptive in how I get things done. Probably why it leads to dread knowing that I'm going to write because I'm so prescriptive in getting ready and preparing to write, but I don't want my stories to be prescriptive. So there's a imbalance there, if you will. But in this self-discovery, I'm trying to learn how to just be without putting so much thought and effort into how I'm going to get to the outcome and just being good with the fact that there will be an outcome.
Mm.
And that's the journey I'm on right now. Just living, being,
I get that. I like to think when I think of writing, because I work full time, even with a podcast, even with any writing that I do, I always used to have a ritual, and I've talked to some of my guests about it with their own writing. You talk about scriptive and have a certain way that you do it. And I like the ritualizing of that because it kind of primes my brain. Okay, it's time. So like the last sort of writing project I was on, I had a special scented candle, and I'm only going to candle when I'm writing, and it just kind of gets me in the mood really quick. I like rituals like that, but I do like the theory of just being. I don't know how you actually fit. So
I'm still trying to figure it out.
Big journey to go on. So I love that. I love that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you so much for joining me, Cher. This has been awesome. Such a great conversation. I feel like we could have had another hour, but let's save it for the next conversation, for the next book. But tell me where your audience can find you. I know you said you hang out on Instagram a bit, so tell us a little bit about where your audience can find you, and I'm going to drop it in the show notes as well.
Absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. I even have a private Facebook community, but nobody is barred from joining. We just want to know who's there. But everything, you can find me everywhere at Cher, that's CHER, and look for TERAIS, Cher Terais. I'm the only one. And so on Instagram is Cher_Terais _author. And then on TikTok, Facebook is just Cher Terais. And so, like I said, do a search on Cher Terais. You'll find me on all socials, and it's easy.
Excellent. That is amazing. Thank you so much, Cher. This has been an amazing conversation. Can't wait to meet you in New Orleans. And I can't wait. I cannot wait.
Absolutely.
It's been a great conversation. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for listening, everyone who is out there tuning in. And I'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us today. You can find out more about our guests in the show notes below. And don't forget to hit subscribe and share this episode with a friend. Until next time, I send you big love.